The Spitfire was never meant to be a machine of perfection from the very beginning. It began as an idea born in an uncertain time, carrying the elegance of design but weighed down by flaws that almost made its creators doubt its future. Like so many of our own stories, it started in the shadows, where promise was hidden behind doubt and brilliance was clouded by fear. In its earliest days, the Spitfire was like a young voice crying out to be heard, but trapped in a world that questioned whether it had any right to belong. Britain in the 1930s stood on the edge of war, and engineers knew they had to build something extraordinary. They wanted a fighter that was sleek, fast, and agile, an aircraft that could dance in the skies and outmaneuver the darkness rising across Europe. The Spitfire's thin elliptical wings looked graceful, almost fragile, as though carved more for beauty than for battle. It stood apart, refusing to copy the heavy, brutish look of the machines of its time, and that very elegance was both its strength and its curse. Mechanics complained it was too delicate. Pilots whispered that the engine ran hot, the range too short, the guns too few. Many doubted if the slender creation could ever hold its own in the firestorm that was coming. But sometimes the very things dismissed as weaknesses are what make a soul or a machine extraordinary. What they saw as fragile was in fact potential, waiting to be tested in the flames of struggle. For when war erupted and the storm reached Britain's shores, it was the Spitfire that lifted from the runways, trembling but determined to meet an enemy that seemed unstoppable. It was a story of the underdog, the misunderstood, the underestimated, the one who had been told, "You are not enough," suddenly forced to prove its worth before the world. In those desperate days of 1940, the Battle of Britain was not just about airplanes. It was about identity, survival, and dignity. Britain was alone, isolated, and written off by much of the world as too small to stand. But when the Spitfire soared, slicing through clouds with its elegant wings, it became more than a machine. It became a symbol of defiance, a voice shouting back at the storm, "We are still here." Each dogfight was not just an exchange of bullets, but a declaration of resilience. The Spitfire's roar carried across the skies like the cry of a people who refused to bow. Yet even in its brilliance, flaws remained. The early Spitfire struggled with engine overheating. Ammunition was limited, forcing pilots to choose their shots with heartbreaking precision. The landing gear was fragile, sometimes snapping on rough fields. But in those imperfections, there was a lesson, a reminder that greatness does not come from being flawless, but from rising despite the flaws. Like the communities who have carried their dignity through centuries of injustice, the Spitfire endured not because it was without weakness, but because it turned weakness into resolve. And so engineers and pilots alike kept pushing it forward, shaping and reshaping it, never satisfied, never giving up. Each new version of the Spitfire was like a child growing into strength. Each change a step closer to the machine it was destined to become. More powerful engines were fitted, stronger wings reinforced, heavier guns added. Its fragile beauty slowly transformed into fierce power. What once looked like a bird of fragile elegance was evolving into a beast that could strike fear into the hearts of enemies. The very machine they once doubted was becoming the hope of a nation. But the Spitfire story is not only about machines and wars. It is about what it means to be underestimated, to be told you are too fragile, too flawed, too unfit, and to rise anyway. It is about turning doubt into determination and weakness into strength. It is the same spirit that has carried countless black men and women through centuries of struggle. Just as the Spitfire's slender wings were mocked, so too were our dreams called too delicate to withstand the storms of discrimination. Just as the Spitfire was doubted by those who could not see its power, so too have we been dismissed, told our voices did not matter. And yet, in the heat of battle, when dignity was on the line, both we and the Spitfire showed the world what resilience truly looks like. By the time the war deepened, the Spitfire had become more than an airplane. It was an icon. Children would run to the fields to watch them climb into the sky, their eyes wide with hope. Pilots who strapped into those cockpits often knew they might not return, but they carried the pride of knowing they flew not just for themselves, but for the countless lives that depended on them. The Spitfire was not perfect, but it was enough. And sometimes, enough is all you need to keep a dream alive. As engineers refined its body, stretching its wingspan, enlarging the propeller, and feeding it engines that roar with thunder, the Spitfire began to claim its true destiny. From flawed elegance, it was turning into something far more formidable. It had started as a dream many doubted, but now it was evolving into a beast, an ultimate force that could dominate the skies. But this transformation did not come quickly or easily. It came through trial, through sacrifice, through loss. Each new Spitfire variant was a page in a story written in blood, sweat, and perseverance. And yet, even in the darkest hours, the Spitfire remained a reminder that beauty and strength can coexist, that grace does not make one weak, and fragility can give birth to ferocity. It stood as a living truth that you can begin as the overlooked, the doubted, and the dismissed, and still rise into the ultimate form of power and respect. Like our own history, the Spitfire's evolution was not a straight line of triumphs. It was a journey through setbacks, heartbreaks, and challenges that seemed impossible. But each flaw became a stepping stone, each limitation a call to push harder. And in the skies above Britain, where young pilots fought with their lives on the line, the Spitfire proved itself again and again, not by being perfect, but by refusing to surrender. The Spitfire story reminds us that dignity does not come from flawlessness, but from the courage to rise above flaws. It is a story of resilience, of underestimated power, of beauty transformed into strength. By the middle years of the war, the Spitfire had already written itself into legend. Yet legend alone was not enough, because the enemy was changing too. The skies grew more dangerous as faster, heavier, deadlier German fighters and bombers swept forward. What had once been the pride of Britain risked being left behind unless it could evolve. And so, the Spitfire entered a transformation unlike anything the engineers or pilots could have imagined. It was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that even something born in fragility could grow into the ultimate beast of the skies. The heart of that transformation was the engine. At first, the Spitfire carried the Rolls-Royce Merlin, a beautiful, smooth machine, but one that struggled when pushed to its limits. The Merlin was like a young voice, pure yet vulnerable, sometimes cracking under the strain. But Rolls-Royce refused to stop. They rebuilt, reforged, and eventually introduced the Griffin engine, a thunderous roar that turned the Spitfire into a predator. Where once it danced gracefully, now it hunted with ferocity. With speed soaring past 400 miles per hour, claws sharpened with cannons instead of machine guns, and a body stretched to wield greater power, the Spitfire was reborn. The same aircraft once criticized as too fragile had now become a nightmare to face. But its power was never simply about machinery. It was about what it represented. For Britain's pilots, climbing into a Spitfire meant more than strapping into steel. It was stepping into a story of endurance. It was taking flight in the embodiment of a nation that refused to bow. And for the wider world, especially for those who understood the sting of being underestimated, the Spitfire became a living reminder that one's beginning does not define one's destiny. To see that slender wing creation become a beast of the skies was to see possibility take shape. The Spitfire fought across every corner of the war. In North Africa, where the desert sun scorched the earth, it raced above burning sands, chasing enemy fighters that once seemed untouchable. In the Mediterranean, its wings cast shadows over seas where navies clashed. Over the cliffs of Normandy, it roared as Allied soldiers stormed the beaches, protecting them with every ounce of its firepower. And in the Pacific, far from the island where it was born, the Spitfire carried its spirit of resistance across oceans. Wherever it went, it was not simply a machine of war. It was a guardian, a messenger, a symbol. But symbols come at a cost. Every victory in the Spitfire's logbook was written in sacrifice. Young men, many barely out of their teens, climbed into cockpits knowing that the odds of return were slim. Some flew their last mission before they had even lived enough to dream of a future. The Spitfire gave them wings, but it could not shield them from the cruel truth of war. And yet, in their sacrifice, there was dignity, because they knew that every life laid down added another stone to the foundation of freedom. The Spitfire was not flawless, nor were those who flew it, but together they rose, carrying a story of courage that endures even now. The evolution of the Spitfire mirrors the journey of a people pressed under weight, doubted and dismissed, yet rising to claim power and pride. When black pilots were finally given a chance to prove themselves in Allied air forces, Many flew Spitfires. Men who had been told their skin was a barrier now sat in cockpits of the most iconic machine of its time, riding their own defiance into the sky. Their presence was proof that dignity cannot be denied, that when given the tools and the chance, underestimated souls can rise as high as anyone. The Spitfire carried not only the story of Britain's survival, but also the echoes of broader struggles for equality and recognition. To see a black pilot soar in a Spitfire was to see two histories converge. One a machine once doubted, and one of people too long silenced, both now roaring with undeniable strength. And the Spitfire kept evolving. Each mark, each version, each new adaptation was like a heartbeat in a living body, pushing itself forward against the tide of time. It became faster, stronger, more heavily armed, until finally it stood as the ultimate beast, capable of shredding to the enemy's most advanced designs. And yet, even as it reached this pinnacle, it never lost the elegance that first defined it. Beneath its new ferocity, the curved wing still spoke of beauty. Even at its most powerful, it refused to lose its grace. That is what made it immortal. When the war ended and silence returned to skies that had once thundered with battle, the Spitfire's journey seemed complete. Yet its legacy lived on, not just in museums or air shows, but in the spirit of resilience it carried. It became a reminder that even in the darkest of times, when the world doubts you, when flaws seem too many to overcome, strength can be born. It became a whisper to generations that followed. Your beginning does not define your end. You can start as fragile elegance, and through perseverance, you can become the ultimate beast of your destiny. For communities that have known centuries of struggle, the Spitfire's evolution carries a reflection. It speaks of transformation under pressure, of dignity born from trials, of beauty and strength existing together. Just as the Spitfire began as something many dismissed, so too have countless voices been overlooked in history. But time, perseverance, and courage have shown again and again that what is underestimated today may be unstoppable tomorrow. The Spitfire story is not just about war. It is about hope, about resilience, about the power of rising beyond expectation. Even now, when its wings slice through the air at commemorations and air shows, people stop and look upward. Children point with awe. Elders feel tears press their eyes. For in that familiar elliptical wing, they see more than metal. They see a story. They see a truth. They see a journey from fragility to ferocity, from doubt to triumph. And in that moment, the Spitfire is no longer just an aircraft. It is us. It is every person who has ever been told they were not enough, yet rose anyway. It is every dream once doubted, now undeniable. It is flawed elegance transformed into ultimate strength. The Spitfire teaches us that power need not come at the cost of grace, that dignity can rise even from imperfection, and that sometimes the greatest beasts are born not from raw force, but from the resilience of the overlooked. Its roar is a sound of history, reminding us that struggle shapes strength and survival shapes destiny. It tells us that the journey from fragility to ferocity is not only possible, but inevitable, when courage refuses to surrender. So when we speak of the Spitfire, we are not just talking about a machine of war. We are telling a story of evolution, of pride, of resilience. A story of what it means to rise when the world expects you to fall. A story that belongs not only to Britain, but to every soul who has carried dignity through struggle. For the Spitfire was once flawed elegance, but in time, it became the ultimate beast.